Hello, all right, everybody. It seems like we are at time and ready to rock. A good group of you out there today, and more will gather as we get rolling. The subject of today's webinar or panel discussion, more accurately, the second in a series of three around the AI Bill of Rights framework. This time we're focusing on notice and privacy. As you probably know, if you are here, particularly as I believe many of you came to the first session as well, the Bill of Rights for AI Bill of Rights Framework is a document that came out of OSTP last October and gives some ideas about what AI should or should not be or do so that we can make sure that the AI we develop and deploy in the US, particularly in the US government, is of general positive impact and is rights protecting and privacy protecting and things like that in regards to the American public. But of course, as most things that are policy or law or come out of the government, particularly the top executive, very general language, lots of sentiment without necessarily a ton of content, a lot open for interpretation and adaptation. And that's why we have these panels to hopefully help clarify for ourselves and for the audience how that can, or how that might be done, how we might interpret, how we might actually apply some of these things. So with that, I'm going to start to get out of the way by allowing our panelists to go. Let's go in order by first name. So Arnold, Britta, Ken, and then Ramsey. Do a quick introduction, the 3 points, who you are, why you're here, and your thread or the thread you'd like the audience to focus on for the conversation.
Okay, I guess I'm up first. This is Arnold Chu. I'm currently working with Federal Housing Finance Agencies. Actually, I started my career related to AI a long time ago. One of the first job out of the colleges was working with a defense company, Allied Signal. Actually, we're working on developing express systems to help diagnostic aircraft, avionic diagnostic system. And through my different parts of the career, I tried to introduce AI in the situation where it's particularly helpful. Currently, I'm trying to stand up a Center of Excellence for my agencies and getting ready for the increasing maturation of governance in the federal government on AI technologies.
Britta?
I am Professor Britta Hale from the Computer Science Department at the Naval Postgraduate School, where I teach in a variety of topics relating to cybersecurity, but also including the privacy and security of AI in our Harnessing AI series. My background is in cryptography, and I've worked in various applications over the years in different sectors of cybersecurity. And in this day and age, that necessarily takes me into AI. And I have also helped run program workshops for the Joint AI Center on the privacy and security of AI applications. In this context, I would say the tagline I would like the audience to be watching for is that one size does not fit all. And I look forward to our discussion.
Very good. Ken, sir.
Good afternoon. Ken Farber, Solution Architect for AI for TechSnap. My background includes, at this point, a wide range of activities, and starting with a technical background, nuclear engineering master's degree, where I developed a natural language processing system for use in control rooms. Went into organizational change and behavior theory at that point with a second master's degree. And for the past 20 years, a lot of work with the federal government in IT strategy, enterprise architecture, organizational change, and over the past 7 years, really focused on AI. And in particular, been working with ATARC for a couple of years in AI policy. And I'm pretty concerned, sort of the through line I'm interested in is that I think the details of the technology can constrain policy solutions in ways that are hard to anticipate. So we get into pretty quickly unanticipated effects. And I think there are opportunities that aren't obvious that we can think through. And I hope with creative folks, we can get to some solutions that I think are very, very strongly needed right now. Thanks.
All right, bases loaded. Ramsey Brown up to bat.
Hey, thanks so much, Tony. My name is Ramsey Brown. I'm the CEO and founder of Mission Control and the AI Responsibility Lab Public Benefit Corporation. Prior to leading Mission Control and Arrow, my career started in computational neuroscience, working on a master's degree in brain mapping and human-computer interaction, describing the connectome and how we might be able to develop both user experience and data architecture level solutions to making the insanely hard problems of navigating connectomics easier for scientists, physicians, and practitioners. After that, spent my time building out behavioral engineering solutions at Dopamine Labs, which I co-founded back in 2015. Got to really ride the lightning of what was going on around tech addiction at a scientific and behavioral science level, alongside then how to enable behavior change at scale, which drew me eventually into speaking at a NATO summit in 2018 about whether or not humans still had free will in an age of artificial intelligence. I would say that was largely the wake-up call that pivoted my career in the direction towards founding the AI Responsibility Lab. And now we're a venture-backed AI safety software company that builds the missing ideas, tools, and community for accelerating quality, velocity, and trust in AI. That focuses on building out basic research for things like advanced concepts around alignment. Our software platform, Mission Control, AI risk management framework delivery system, purpose-built for AI risk management frameworks, as well as generative AI trust and compliance, and the necessary community around the world, including my relationship with Cambridge, where I operate as a senior research associate at Jesus College. So grateful to be here and grateful to kind of get to bridge some worlds today, and excited to get to spend this time with other panelists.
Most excellent. Okay, so let's get into some of the meat of it. To start, because I don't imagine that everybody here, and particularly those in the audience, are equally familiar with the AI Bill of Rights and its content. I suppose at least one of us should take a little bit of time to say something about what the AI Bill of Rights actually says about notice and privacy. I'm going to make that a jump ball, but it might be Ken's responsibility, since this is a policy group event, you're a policy group co-chair, if you're willing.
Sure. So I don't have it open in front of me. So notice, I remember the one thing that's jumped out to me is that they included two pieces. It's notice and explanation. So that was tricky of them. Two independent things. And so the statement is that the users of AI should always receive notice that they're interacting with an AI system. And further, and I think the more complicated part, is an explanation of whatever decisions are made by the system. So I agree with the sentiment. Oh, I guess we don't want to get into the discussion just yet, but I agree with the sentiment. I think there's some real problems, real challenges in implementation. And so that's what I recall about the notice and explanation section. Was there another piece you wanted to talk to right now, or you want to just start with that?
I think it's reasonable to split it down the middle and start with notice.
Yeah.
You started to bleed into a conversation point. Would you like to just finish the thought?
Right. So the challenge there, and I'll throw this out to the group too, because I'm really interested in what other people think, but I think the notice piece is probably pointless. At this point, we have a notice, right, sort of framework now with all software where everybody ignores the end-use license agreement. You scroll as long as you have to, you hit the button. That's not effectively notice, right? It's there, you could read it if you want to, nobody does. And you don't find out what's there until there's a problem. And the private sector in providing those things seems to be incented to make it either it's just easier, or they're incentivized to make it impossible to read through. So it's very difficult to set standards for understandability. And we're going to run into the exact same problem with any kind of notice requirement on AI. And also, I think it's pointless because every single piece of technology you touch is going to have AI. So how many times are you going to be notified that, oh, another algorithm just kicked off and it's going to be affecting your interaction with this system? We're not going to be able to have any kind of user experience. Or it's going to be a single notice at the beginning where, okay, yeah, but every single time you open your phone, oh, you're working with AI. Got it. Thank you. So I'm not sure about the value of that one, really. Although I like the idea. Maybe it's more of an education where everybody just needs to understand you're always working with somebody's algorithm, or somebody's algorithm is always working on you.
All right. Anybody have a response to that? Strong word, the word pointless, I think.
Yeah, I will devil's advocate in favor of the importance of notice, but Ken, I will strongly agree that because the direction of the digital transformation is to turn as many analog processes into digital processes that render data usable to machine learning, data processing, or other forms of AI systems, for which those will become the predominant drivers of value along the value chain, be it public or private sector, as we're already starting to see. I think you're right to say that it's basically going to be pervasive, that if you're interacting in a digital context as an end user, you already are and are almost certainly guaranteed to be basically constantly interfacing with some form of system that is making inferences, classifications, or control decisions against data that you provided. Also, the pervasiveness I strongly agree with. The futility of such is where I think we might have a glimmer of hope. And I look at this from the semiotic perspective of the symboling that has to happen in a lock and key fashion between organizations that are required for posting notice, which you're right to point out is a Gordian knot in and of itself, but that the real leverage point we may have here culturally is in helping people understand through something like a media literacy approach of what they should be expecting in terms of the structure of their interactions when they go online.
Yeah.
And it's that balance of the responsibility on the notifiers and the responsibility on the public to maintain wherewithal and situational awareness and an education level of what to look out for and how to contextualize that to where they are, that I think is where we're going to see the most interesting things happen over the next few years, as starting as probably as young as high school and younger, to begin to help younger people understand when I go online and there's something I'm interacting with, even if it seems like a deterministic process or even a real person, there's a good chance it's not. And these two things are going to have to come together to work.
I would say, I think that I agree with much of what both the other panelists spoke, but I think there is one particular area, one type of use case that where notice is very important, and that's where there's possibility that a user might confuse an AI-backed system interaction versus a human-backed system. It relates to the issue of these deepfake and impersonations and manipulation possibilities. I think those areas notice can be important and useful. There are other ones where it's going to be useless, like if you have AI fixing your grammar, why do you have to tell people about it? It's like, I'm using a spell checker. Do I have to tell people using a spell checker? Those type of areas certainly doesn't benefit much from notice. In other areas where you do have interactions, the more important option is to allow people to opt out, as many of these framework require suggest the ability of fallback, a human alternative, ways to opt out of using the AI, and that's probably more useful than the notice by itself.
There's certainly an aspect to be considered here regarding the complexity of the situation as how it's changed for data. So thinking back to GDPR and the early days of privacy notices, there was actually a very common norm among companies to post that 100 pages of privacy notice that everyone scrolls through and clicks confirm at the end.
Yeah.
And we have one aspect of this, of that privacy notices and what that means can change. It's not a fix. We don't always have to be scrolling through 100 pages. For instance, traveling on an international flight coming into the US, and go through immigration, they do an image scan of you for a facial scan. There's actually a little notice under that facial scan that says this data will be held for whatever it was, 24 hours, 12 hours, or immediately deleted. Now they could put 100 pages of privacy notice there, and coming off of a 13-hour flight, I would absolutely not read those 100 pages. However, having that little bit of information, knowing that this is going to be deleted in, say, 24 hours, actually helps build trust in the system. and not just trust in the system, but in how the government is using that data. And we have a wider, I think, responsibility for what we envision society becoming to encourage trust and among each other, and especially if we want people to be able to trust the government, that we have a method of disclosing how data is going to be used. That can have layers. So coming off that 13-hour flight, maybe it is a very short statement. Couple words, we'll be deleting 24 hours. And then there's a much longer version of this that can be posted and shared online for researchers who will dig through 100 pages of privacy notice that says exactly how it's stored, how it's deleted, and how it's transferred during those 24 hours. So that's one side of that. Notice can change, and what we expect of notice can change and develop over time. There's another side of this I think makes it all the more important to have some form of notice, and that's the complexity of data collection. So traditional GDPR, again, was just data collection, privacy. That's how people were treating it. Now with AI, your data can be used to make decisions about me, and my data can be used to make decisions about you. It's not just data collection anymore. There's various inferences involved in complexities of the situation. And so to encourage a society where we can have a more trusting basis, we do need some form of notice. And that might take various levels of detail.
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to jump in there, Britta, because you just used a really, really big word, and that's trust. And that's a big concept in and around AI. And I noticed that the way that you framed the problem is very, very typical for, especially in the government. And it's all framed around creating trustworthy systems and encouraging trust in systems. And it's interesting to me that we're using that kind of frame for this problem when in the corporate security world, IT security world, everything is moving to zero trust. And I wonder if there's an allegory there where if we are trying to encourage trust for people to have trust in systems, I wonder if we've got it backwards, because it seems to me there's a risk that if you're spending effort trying to get people to have trust, it seems to me like you might not be spending the resources on that you could be using on creating systems that are actually worthy of that trust, that actually deserve that trust. And I'd like to understand, but that's a huge topic, and I don't want to derail what we're here to talk about today.
No, but that's a great comment that you made, and definitely worth as a quick addressing of that. So zero trust and trust in the systems is that is one side. So what I was talking about is actually trust in government and trust in society. Can I trust your company? Can I trust the government to handle my data in a responsible way? And that's the sort of trust that's very beneficial to society, that we're able to have transparency as much as possible. Trust in systems, that's an entirely different thing. And I absolutely agree that we need to be building stronger systems and be able to focus less on the trust of them.
Right.
Britta, I appreciate that, because it's almost this, like, this need for more, not even more precise language, just different words to point to for each of these, where trust is tripping us out. Because Britta, what you're describing is like social contract trust. Like, is there an understanding of structured and verifiable dependability between people in the state, for which we all collectively get to participate in this democracy, versus are the components and processes of a structured system able to be verified such that we've reduced the chances of anything going wrong? And it's just a kind of a weird quirk of language that we use trust to point to both of those, but they point to each what I think we do kind of want out of this, which is the stability and dependability of our systems, whether they're technosocial systems or strictly technical systems. They're still the same thing that I think we want out of the end of the day, which is the ability to depend on them, that they're going to behave in accordance with our values.
Let me take this slightly different direction. That I think this question about the system being worthy of trust is very important, and it ties into my point about the alternative aside from notice. And I think it's particularly interesting that Professor Hale talked about the example for going through airport security, because one clear feature is that you cannot opt out. You cannot opt out of going through the security. So even though you have that notice saying, we'll delete your data, you have no chance to say, I don't want the data recorded in the first place. So I'm saying the fact that in the new AI governance framework, they're at least raising the option, they should a design that actually engender food social trust may give you effective option than the alternative to having the data collected in the first place. And I think that's a better direction than just saying that I'm making communication to make you feel more comfortable, even though you cannot opt out.
Okay,
I'm reminded of the realization that many industrial engineers had that there are certain elevators they're constructed in ways that the close and open door buttons don't actually do anything. They're not actually hooked to anything. No, I'm completely serious. Like those are automated sensor systems that will open and close according to the proximity detection. But they found that if you remove those buttons, you violate part of the socio-technical contract with the end users around like, no, I need some semblance of control and informed like something here at all times, even if it's kind of the illusion of control. So I think one of the things you point to in this sense, in a kind of twisted sense, is this actually would be an interesting likely failure mode of all of this is, Ken, back to your point, if it turns out that, Ken, you're right, and it is undoable, and this problem is Sisyphean to start, a pernicious failure mode that we'd enter in a kind of blue washing kind of perspective, like greenwashing, but for AI, is that we have notice, but it is for maintaining that illusion of trust, as opposed to for legitimate trust development.
Yeah.
And everyone kind of looks at this as they may like a Prop 65 warning here in California, like, okay, I know, but please let me have my Starbucks.
Yeah.
And it kind of defeats the purpose of the whole matter.
And go ahead, sorry, Britta.
Oh, thanks. What I was thinking about when you were saying that, Ramsey, was how kind of the question of, I'll say, snake oil when purchasing systems. Are we actually purchasing systems that are advertising in terms of whatever notice they give to the end user or to the companies that actually purchase or make those contracts? Are they actually delivering on that? And that's not always very clear. Even when we start getting into privacy discussion later, I think whether it's deletion or use or transfer of data or how that learning has behaved, even when companies claim that they have done bias checks, there's been various studies where those bias checks haven't actually involved, for example, folks who would fall under the ADA. So have they actually evaluated the software? And notice ultimately shouldn't just be a checkbox. It is really about communicating with good intention what is essential for the end user to know, and if possible, make a determination for themselves about use.
And since part of this conversation is all about how the user perceives and interacts with the system, what kinds of behavior happen as a result of that interaction, I keep coming back to the idea that we don't really know how the kids today that are, under 20 years old, say, have been affected by growing up immersed in media their entire lives. And my interaction with my kids tells me that they are highly cynical of everything that they see. So this contract, I imagine, won't be entered into. At least I know that I live just north of DC, so it's a very specific bubble. But I think this difference in behavior, difference in relationship to technology, it's hard for folks to, I think people like us who are generally practitioners in the area, to anticipate and understand how that dynamic might affect how they see these systems.
And to maybe, oh, please, sorry, Britta.
No, go ahead, Ramsey.
Ken, to your point of if perennially the kids are all right, or at least the kids are going to be all right, it could be the case that kind of reactionary post-Zuckerbergian skepticism of all things they see online actually ends up being one of the things that saves us here, for which this relatively avant-garde default critical theoretical lens with which they approach the world of, okay, but what are they really saying? Okay, but what's the incentive structure? That might actually get us really far here. By which when someone, and I'll pick on private sector here, private sector company says, we value your privacy. It's like, all right, now let me go click through and see what's really going on. that kind of intuition that the next generation may have just due to intrinsic media literacy and growing up in an age where their attention span was already a commoditized good, that might prove to be actually a good lever here for us.
Kid and Ramsey, you make great points on accounting for the current, and when I say current, I also should be saying current developing social considerations. And those, the decisions we're making now about AI aren't just for us. They're not even just for the children. They could be lasting 50, 100 years. And part of our decisions regarding these sorts of things should also be accounting for how do we expect these implications on society? What sort of society do we want today's generation's grandchildren or great-grandchildren to live in? What will be, if we're jaded, then it's maybe not a very pleasant life to be living. So how do we account for their current take on things, but also look to how we can try to design either the systems or how we inform users so that we're building those generations and the ones that come after them to have the best possible lives.
Well, Ramsey, I totally agree with you. I think you take this exactly correct. The analogy is I think of is between our generation versus our prior generation, where advertising really took off. Before that, people that grew up without the modern types of advertising, pervasive and very, frankly, very manipulative approaches, they were much more credulous of things that they see, ads they see, and the even newspaper communication and so forth. But at least certainly, I think in our generation that we learned to try to abstract from advertising what might be the real message, what might be parts of it you could believe, what may parts of you should never believe. And having grown up with the evolution, we're in a better place to manage it. And it's the same thing, I think, for the kids growing up today. They're growing with these rapidly changing environments and frankly, the many technology companies that really haven't earned the trust. I think I think they're correct not to trust them. So.
And Arnold, to that point, and Britta, to what you described, which I think gets to the billion-dollar question here. At the end of the day, it's important, I think we do not lose sight of the goal resting underneath all of compliance or governance and trust, and which is, as far as we can tell, that of virtue, and trying to understand how should the technosocial systems we create align with our notions of a good life, both for ourselves and for our ability to make decisions for those who are coming after us. So Britta, to the extent that you described, what does this mean for that generation, and what sort of world do they want to be living in? What sort of world do we want to shape for them to be living in? I think that's the extremely appropriate lens to approach all of this, because the decisions we make today are not strictly technical or policy decisions. They're decisions about the shape of the fabric of America tomorrow. And it probably is telling that this is all wrapped under the guise of a Bill of Rights, because like our founding Bill of Rights, this is a document that will try to span virtue ethics and our notions of a good life to things that are just emerging now, or to our friend Sandy Barsky's question in the Q&A, future technological waves like quantum, just to pick on Sandy's question, that we're going to have to re-engage with a similar critical discourse at each part. And as each of these new technologies come, we're still going to be asking the same similar types of questions, not at a mechanism or an operation level, but at a fundamental, what do we want out of this? And where are we going? And where do we want this to go? Which is so much substantially more impactful than us getting lost in the weeds, at least as far as I'm concerned, about whether or not this is different this time. It's always going to be the same. It's a question of, like, how does this align with who we want the country to be? And if we lose sight of that, then I think we're in trouble.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Okay, as we're getting to the back half, let's change tack slightly. I'm talking a lot about what notice and privacy might, or we're talking mostly about notice, but privacy has come up a little bit. but more about like what it is and what it might indicate. There's been some questions, and there's some of it in our prep as a group when we talked, and also out in the ether, we're all aware that trade-offs is a word that comes up often. So I thought it might be reasonable to take a little bit of time to talk about trade-offs. The two big trade-offs that seem to have come up a lot for notice and privacy are security, obviously, particularly like national security or law enforcement type security. And the other one that came up in the chat a little bit and that I've heard recently is with innovation. If consistently telling people that things are happening and having to burden ourselves with that work effort, and then having people opt out left, right, and center, if that might slow innovation. So if anybody would like to jump on any sort of those trade-offs, I would appreciate that direction of the conversation. Britta?
I see. I see we've all unmuted around the same time. Great question. I'm sure it's going to spark a lot of discussion here. So the security aspects are particularly focusing on the privacy aspects. If you look at the AI Bill of Rights, these cover use and collection and transfer and access and deletion of data. And so there's multiple things in play. And I'll segue in from where we're wrapping up with the discussion on notice in terms of trust, and say, well, how's that trust going to be implicated with how we treat privacy? And if you have data, or let's say I give you some of my data, and it is then used for a certain purpose, but transferred without information, either notifying me or my agreeing to it, then that can have an implication for society and how the society views that, let's say that's government doing this, how society views the government and that treatment. So thinking simple case, let's say you ask a child for if you can use their toy. And they say, sure, and they're very trusting. And then you go and sell it on eBay. That is going to violate some trust. Now that's basically transfer of data. You have allowed access and transfer to something that they didn't agree to. And you say, well, technically it falls under what we've allowed you. I asked if I could use your toy. But intrinsically what they were assuming wasn't happening. And so just that assumption has now been violated. That trust in that assumption has been violated. So next time they're not going to trust you with their toy. And similar thing goes for privacy with data. If there's just a social expectation, I'll say, that my data, when I share it with you, will be used for a certain purpose, even if legally you're in the clear to transfer that. If I haven't agreed to it, then there can be social ramifications. You think of like use of AI in medical areas. Under HIPAA, technically, it should be used very strictly. But if I sign a document where I think, okay, I'll trust you to be protecting this data just socially from that, but it's actually used or transferred or accessed by other people, then that has violated my trust. And I can see where there could be a very large snowball effect from this type of violation of privacy, because people do feel that very closely when their privacy has been violated. When I say violated, it's their expectation of what they had thought from privacy. So there is a big picture question on how we can satisfy, to the greatest extent, the user expectation of privacy and share that or allow them control where possible.
I guess I keep coming back to Ramsey's pernicious failure mode point, because I worry that everything that you said is right. Is that there can be this violation of trust, and there can be terms and conditions, and we could run into trouble because they're violated, and then maybe the user pulls back and doesn't share so much and all that stuff. But with this technology, since the data can be replicated infinitely and never goes away, and the commercial interest is very strongly aligned around monetizing every piece of data they can get, and with at least the potential of regulatory capture by agencies that are to look after this kind of interest. I remain worried, at least if not cynical, about where this could go, about how bad this is going to get, because one avenue that I see coming up is, as the ChatGPT kind of indicates, and that if you look at the value people get out of social media. To me, that leads toward this technology that's going to become a companion to users. You're going to have everything in your environment that's technology is going to be infused with this intelligence and is going to support you, or they'll actually be like entities that are presented to you as people. And I just see that there's going to be this tremendous attraction toward trusting this kind of infused artificial intelligence that's all around, because it's all going to be customized and built for you to make you engaged. And right now, engagement is driven by frustration and anger. But if engagement can be driven by social and emotional support, which I think would be more compelling, it'd be tremendously more powerful and create an enormous marketing mechanism. And so I'm worried about that combination and where that leads us in terms of privacy and in terms of, malfeasance.
I think the innovation versus regulation question was easier for me to wrap my head around how this looks in the States 6 months ago than today. And that is less on the heels of the technical innovations around things like ChatGPT and more on the heels of NVIDIA becoming $1 trillion company. And when I think about the incentive structures that go in, not to governance writ large, like ontologically, but the American form of governance that we have, for better or for worse, and the incentive structures that some of our representatives find themselves under for making decisions around privatization versus regulation, I would hate to be the member of the House of Reps who looks at their constituents and says, I'm going to take one of the only consistently growing bright spots in our domestic economy and one of the major bases of our global strategic dominance, and I'm going to kneecap it.
Right.
And I'm going to ask you to back me in that and continue to elect me. That there's a lot of things I've just normatively injected in all of those statements on purpose to create a bit of a cartoon example. And I'm deeply aware that I'm creating a cartoon example of how American governance works, but I think it's a useful prop here, because if we look at what the alternatives look like to something like the EU AI Act, we look at what the UK has. And I think the US and the UK are going to stand in more similar positions with their relationship to things like data privacy at a blanket regulatory level than will look like the EU, in which we're going to structurally devolve the responsibilities of data privacy regulation down to industry-specific regulators, like we already do, like we already have, both in the data privacy and even the model governance perspectives. And we forget that SR 11.7 is put out by the Federal Reserve and became a bit of the backbone for the global financial system's understanding of model risk assessment that became part of the archetypes that other regulators started looking at how to do this right. We've already had a pathway where we devolve this. My gut tells me the place we're going to find ourselves in a few years is we're going to go down that devolved pathway where we have individual organizations that look to things like NIST and say, well, NIST RMF is a great starting point, but we're going to do this in lieu of a blanket federal regulation that a lot of people might look at as actually being antithetical to innovation.
The tricky point, though, is what the incentive and the direction of innovation that can point it to, unfortunately, in my mind, it's going to be even much worse than the picture can paint it. And I think part of our job should be to help make the public aware of the different kinds of danger and capability that is evolving very rapidly. I mean, one of the things that AI has really enabled is the effective mass surveillance of activity of practically everyone. And one of the things that the EU AI does emphasize, and it's not mentioned as much in the U.S. government's framework as much, is they call it remote biometric sensing. And I think most commonly people talk about the specific case of facial recognition, cameras and tracking people's movement and so forth. But actually there are many different ways that this is extended because of current and future capability. I'll just give you one example of how pervasive and perhaps invasive it can be. There's been a successful experimental system to monitor data like heart patient primarily in maybe senior living centers or intensive care unit and so forth. And it just by using a unit like a Wi-Fi router and analyzing the signal bounce back from the people based on that Wi-Fi router, the electromagnetic wave signal, it can detect heartbeats. Okay, it can count how many people is in the room and where they're going, where they're moving to. This is entirely outside room. All they need is the same antenna that sends signal, they can receive it. And you tap the signal and you can monitor what's going on in the room totally remotely. Okay, this is one example. And AI is one of the key technologies that enable this to happen. And you can imagine extended to all them kind of modality and sensor that were developed at this time, how much of every single behavior and even emotions can be captured with these type of technology. So it's not just a companion, it could be literally like a all-knowing person that knows everything about you, and then try to tell you to do certain things. And but the question is, whose interest is it serving when it's doing that, right? So that's the biggest challenge, I think, for us.
I would postulate that any system like that will be serving the interests of the person who put it in place. So I think that's part of what we've got to be worried about. And I agree, part of our responsibility, I think, is to help folks understand at least how we see some of these risks moving forward.
Arnold, you make a great point for manufacturers to be aware of, and not just manufacturer, but in general with organizations and those who are contracting to them, to be aware of that when we're talking about AI and all this, what can be deduced from data, it's not just what's immediately in front of us. It's not just what we claim to be the main purpose. There can be many further uses that might not even be anticipated yet. And our decisions now are going to be causing changes down the line. I'll note, partly because I feel obliged at this point to add some sort of silver lining to all of this, although I agree hardly with everything that's been said to this point. That is the silver lining. There are trade-offs in terms of the types of data that are being used and collected and how AI is being applied. It's not one size fits all. How you protect data, for example, your password to your bank account, is very different from how sensitive you think the data is of your favorite ice cream flavor. So there's a wide variety of even user side view on what privacy means and what we expect. And so when we're talking about privacy policy, it's not that we have to inhibit necessarily innovation in terms of having blanket, never collect, never use. There needs to be some sort of sentience to this methodology, and just common sense of saying, what is that data that's being collected? And is it going to be very sensitive, or could it be misused? If we're talking about heartbeats of people, or your password, or your walking gait, that is very personal. If we're talking about cars on a highway, that is far less personal. And the types of policy restrictions or considerations don't need to necessarily be the same. And that gives a wide breadth of innovation possibilities.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll try to add maybe a silver lining, but more of an opportunity. And that is when we look at the kinds of biases that have been demonstrated by a lot of our current systems, it seems to me like what we've actually done is we've reverse engineered in very specific topic areas, the bias that existed historically in these different decision-making environments like resume reviews or even image detection, and sentencing guidelines and things like that. So it seemed, as an engineer, I looked at that and I say, okay, if we've got a really good reverse engineered model of something we don't like, maybe that's a tool for being able to avoid it or engineer it out of systems in the future. And so to me, there's an opportunity here of being able to define and then implement definitions of things like fairness and transparency. We just need to sort of figure out, or maybe we'll just stumble on the right way to implement those definitions once they come up.
Okay, so here's my proposal for our last round of minutes of talking. Let's borrow, I'm gonna borrow a more safe for work version of a famous conversational, particularly drinking conversational game, and leverage Sandy's question at the same time. I suggest to you reuse, revise, reject things from the current Bill of Rights that we use for AI as we go forward into cyber, as we go forward into quantum, as we go forward into other innovations. Might be a bit much for everybody to get one for each of the three, so partial answers will be accepted.
Okay.
But take a moment to think, and then whenever anybody's ready, or Ken, if you're ready, go for broke.
Okay, so I'll just jump in because I was thinking about this earlier and this happens to fit. I would reuse the framing of a Bill of Rights. In other words, I would reuse the approach that says that creates a boundary around what can be done, rather than trying to get more explicit or more instructional about how things need to be done. I would reuse the idea that certain things shouldn't happen. So I would keep that. I would revise, I guess, these areas where we're not sure that they're going to be able to be applied. I'm not, I guess, for instance, I would try to get more specific about what's meant by explanation. So when you're dealing with quantum, for instance, if you're worried about quantum computing and you want to set policies around that, I wouldn't guess that you would be able to right now, for instance, wall off any particular application of that kind of computing, although there's already people worried about its application toward cybersecurity. So I'm rambling on that point, and I can't really, so reject. I don't really have a good option about what I would reject. I think every area that I see in the Bill of Rights is at least a valuable area to explore. Whether it's been done exactly the right way, I can't say for sure.
Well, I'll jump in with a one size does not fit all comment. So technology necessarily is coming in waves. There's certain technologies that definitely hit public interest, and AI is one of them. There's some huge leaps in innovation that are happening. If we look historically, we might see, for example, blockchain and Bitcoin was another hot topic, and quantum will be another one. Each of these targets different areas, and as such, our types of notices and privacies and concerns in one don't necessarily apply to the others. In AI, we are using user data quite often. There are privacy concerns. Sometimes those are very sensitive pieces of information about individuals. And so the types of restrictions or considerations that we are looking for in AI are going to be different than, say, if we look back at Bitcoin, for example. The concerns there start focusing more on like financial sector and financial implications. It's less so on the is the privacy of my data and my walking gait under consideration. So generalizing this type of Bill of Rights is probably very difficult across technologies. And if we try to do predictive analysis of it, it's likely to either inhibit innovation or probably most likely will ignore critical consideration that will emerge for whatever that next wave of technology innovation is.
I'm going to focus just on the reuse piece, because I think there's actually a lot that went surprisingly right about this so far. Surprisingly right, not to downplay our predictions or belief that the federal government or the executive branch is going to kind of step out in front of the problem before it gets big, but I still find myself surprised at times by like the thoroughness and the speed at which this is moving as an indicator of this being taken relatively seriously. All of that said, would this have been great to have 5 years ago? Yes, of course. However, I would say that the things to reuse here are the top level ownership of this problem, that this is being pushed forward by the White House in the way that it is, I think sends enough communication outwards and downwards, both throughout the US government and to our allies and even our adversaries about how seriously we're taking this problem, that this is going to have White House level sponsorship and White House level engagement. I would say that the nomenclature to call it an AI Bill of Rights and to conjure up all of the emotional attachment, imagery, and gravitas for which we take the US Bill of Rights is actually apropos to the task at hand in reflection of how seriously this is being taken. And the striving for partnership between public sector and private sector, and between public sector and public sector that I see in the Bill of Rights gives me the belief that something here is working right. So when I see things like the AI Village at this year's DEF CON in Las Vegas, partially sponsored by the White House and the team behind the AI Bill of Rights, promoting public teardowns of the large language models from private sector at the world's largest hacker summit. That's the kind of thing that I see as, wow, this dedication to working alongside private sector innovators to promote our virtues and our values collectively and see that as a path to innovation, not just the disruption of innovation. That gives me a lot of hope. And then the partnership between the office and NIST for the promotion of the hard work NIST has put into developing a risk management framework suite that may bridge a variety of different concerns, to me suggests that communication between departments is working as intended too. So I'd see those things of partnership, ownership, and communication as being things that should be reused going forward.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we're all in fair amount of agreement on a lot of this. I mean, if you look at the US government historically has not been a leader in creating and bringing in new technology. And if you think of how much the IT modernization effort took in the federal sector and compare to the effort that's put into dealing with AI, I think we're moving at warp speed if you compare historically, and that's a great thing, you know. I mean, there are still, I come more a little on the revised side. I think you do right the direction and the way the phrasing and the context, social context is good, it's the right way. By doing certain areas that could be revised and enhanced as compared to particular points that are made in the EU AI Act. And a couple of points that I think is good to try and incorporate in some version of this is the potential for AI to manipulate and really emotionally engage and manipulate people. They do spend a fair amount of paragraph addressing those issues, and I think in the US framework, we should expand more thoughts and try to put more framework around this. And I like the framing that these attempt at setting out kind of the rule of the road, so to speak, is not necessarily stifling innovation, but in a way really helps it, because as one of the first topics we talked about right at the beginning, is the issue of trust. Right? If particularly new generations start from the place that they're not trusting this new technology, how can you frame and structure your development process so that the trust can be built in, so to speak, as the technology evolves and people build product, and the innovators actually incorporate this as part of their design thinking, and not try to patch it up after they, build some big shiny new thing and try to fix it afterward. So I hope that is the direction we'll be going.
Any last crystallizing thoughts from anybody before we start to close it out? Okay, great. Oh, yep.
I'll add, keep up the good work, everyone. This is definitely a massive team effort for instituting AI in a responsible manner. So it takes us all on board.
Very good. Thank you, Britta. We all appreciate that very much. Everybody in this room works on it, including yourself. And it is good. I mean, I do appreciate that. And we do need to keep, we need to be realistic and not, but we need to not be dour. There is a lot of opportunity. There's a lot still going on. We are at something of, this is one of those periods that people in the future will read about in a textbook. It's weird to live through one sometimes. You don't realize you're doing it, but there are things that we're doing and dealing with that are brand new, that haven't been dealt with before. Nothing is perfectly novel, I suppose, particularly when you get into abstractions and philosophical baselines and everything becomes chemistry and physics and logic at some point. But more specifically, it is new, interesting things. So with this, we're going to close for today. I'd like to thank all of our panelists one last time, particularly, well, in equal measure, those that are returning for their second appearance, like Ramsey and Arnold, as well as those that are, and I guess Ken was moderator last time, and Britta for joining us this time. We will have our third panel of 3 on September 12th. Some of these panelists will be consistent. Some panelists from panel 1 will be back. It should be a great event. I encourage everybody to mark your calendars. Again, September 12th, I believe the same time of day. And registration information for that will go out very soon. There you go. It's on your screen now. The beginnings of the panel are forming. Oh, sorry. This is the next panel for ATARC in general. Please excuse me. That appears to be in a mere 2 days. ATARC likes to keep them regular. I don't know too terribly much about this particular topic, but I do know both Michael and Suman, so I assume it'll be almost as good a panel as this one. Maybe not quite as good, but it still should be a very good panel. So with that, I'll give you back 2 more minutes, and I will hope to see you in September 12th, and maybe also the 13th, but particularly the 12th. And everybody have a great day. Bye.
Thanks so much, John.